What is going on, everyone? Online prep coach Ask here with pepcoach.com. Today, mitochondrial peptides, mitochondrial seminar. I actually thought a little bit before I wanted to do this. Usually I just get on a whim or someone says something or I'm supposed to make a video for something I'm doing consulting wise. But this one, I thought about how I wanted to draw the mitochondria because the problem with mitochondria is you say that and to me you can't learn or understand anything until you can actually picture it. So that's really where I started to be able to recall a lot of things, be able to remember a lot of things, and really be able to comprehend a lot of things. Because if you can't see it in your mind's eye, then it's not real. It doesn't really matter. So we're going to see how this goes. I would like to make a big mitochondria, label it, talk about the important parts. And again, we're not going to get to everything. I don't even think we know everything about mitochondria yet. And then we can kind of put in the mitochondrial peptides, and then we might have to erase it all to talk about doses and things like that. I'm not sure. I'd like to make a whole big diagram. And I'm going to try and write in bigger letters as well because I would like you guys to actually see it because I tend to write pretty small. So we're going to see how it goes. But I'm really excited to talk about mitochondria. And before we even begin again, how do I see mitochondria? So the two things that I think we should point out with the mitochondria. Number one, they are the folding hubs of the body. This is where, even though they can make their own proteins, like 15%, they fold so many proteins and cause so much genomic action. So number one, they're doing a lot, because what's a glycoprotein? A receptor. What's a receptor? Just folded proteins. If you look at everything in our body, it's basically just folded proteins, and that's why basic amino acids, basic protein is so vitally important for our species. So number one, folds proteins. And I'm not going to write that on the board because I don't want to clog up the space. And then number two, I think, is the fact that they are not reactive. They are making decisions before an event actually happens. So they are literally anticipatory. We're looking at this connection with the fascial network. So mitochondria and fascia literally cross-communicate, cross-interact, and drive all these adaptations before something happens. They fire faster than neurons, which is crazy when you look at how fast those little suckers fire. So to me, mitochondria in terms of the longevity community is being blown up for great reason for that exact purpose. Mitochondria in the athletic community is being blown up for that reason, for that purpose, and it's awesome. So mitochondria are cool. Let's try and make this, okay? I have a couple different colored markers down there too, so we can kind of keep things a little bit separated. Again, bear with me. You're probably gonna see the back of my head a lot in this video. I do apologize for that. But let's go ahead, let's make our mitochondria. So the problem is if you read in the research, or rather not even in the research, if you just read a basic textbook, it says they're these sausage-shaped organelles, or they're the powerhouse of the cell. And it kind of makes you chuckle a little bit because you think of these sausages, it's like, oh, these sausages are controlling everything, or are they just doing energy? And there's just so much more to that. So we have, first of all, we're gonna literally label everything. So this outer portion, literally what it sounds like. We're having that outer membrane. The outer membrane is important because why? It is very permeable. This portion, to me, through my lens, is probably one of the most important portions of the mitochondria because if you cannot get something in, doesn't matter. If you also can't get something out, it causes a lot of damage. So to me, that outer portion right here is the most important portion, and again, it's highly permeable. Now, we're gonna draw a couple things. We talked about this in the SLU seminar. It's gonna be tough because we have a couple different receptors and channels, but we'll kind of erase some stuff if we don't like it. We have these invaginations, and I'm not gonna draw all of them. I'll just put a couple. These invaginations are called cristae. What these cristae do is they're actually adding surface area. So if you've ever read anything, studied drug metabolism, anything in pharmacokinetics and dynamics, what do you know about surface area? I'll try and make this look a little pretty. Surface area improves kinetics, nutrient kinetics, drug kinetics, kinetics all across the board. So we have these cristae, so I'll put it right here, which again are those invaginations coming in. Those have a high surface area And again, we know it has a high surface area to improve the kinetics of literally every part of the mitochondria. So then in here, we have the intermembrane space. What's important about here, this intermembrane space, is it's very high in protons, which is going to make sense once we get to the electron transport chain, how SS-31 works, and all that kind of fun stuff. So that intermitochondrial membrane has a high amount of protons. So then, again, I told you there's a lot. There's these inner mitochondrial membrane. That's cool because it is less permeable than the outer portion. Because again, not everything needs to get into the mitochondria, and everything should get into the mitochondria, but certain things we want in the mitochondria. So we have those. We have a lot of other things going on here. We're going to draw, first of all, everything in here in the middle. This is all our mitochondrial matrix, right? So within that within that mitochondrial matrix exists a lot of cool things, right? We're going to start off with, again, there's a lot. Yeah, let's do, so that little sucker, to me, that's what we're going to call mitochondrial DNA, okay? So we have these mitochondrial DNAs, which are maternal DNAs. These can produce their own proteins. Like we talked about, it can produce about 15% of protein. So it's actually folding things. There's proteases in here. There's so many cool things in there. But this mitochondrial DNA is going to be maternal. And then it's going to be able to actually produce proteins. Roughly the number is like about 15%, something like that. Now in here, what have you heard me talk about a lot beforehand? We've talked about mitochondrial glutathione. We've talked about mitochondrial superoxide dismutase, which could also be SOD2, depending on what piece of research you're reading. So we'll put that too for all the research buffs out there. Or there are chlorophyll metabolites. So this is important to understand. We're going to actually lump all these three together. If we go back to the day, way back in the day when there was just algae and there was just bacteria and things were forming, those slowly formed mitochondria. They formed that actual lipid bilayer. The cool part of that is if you actually look at the time of day, like people will theorize the best time to have your biggest meal of the day is supposed to be about noon to 2 p.m. because of how mitochondria developed from algae in the sea and the sun spectrum at that time of day. So because of that, we start to see, oh, okay, if we as a species kind of developed and started as bacteria, algae, and that's how these mitochondria formed, a big part of that is superoxide dismutase from a spirulina, and then chlorophyll from a chlorella. So in reality, certain times I'll say that like the 3 intra-mitochondrial receptors, in reality, I guess there aren't really receptors, but to me there kind of has to be if these things are acting there. It's these chlorophyll metabolites, these superoxide dismutase mitochondrial, and these mitochondrial glutathione molecules that are massively important to keeping this entire mitochondria healthy. So these players, and I'll put them bigger over here so you can see. Glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and then chlorophyll, more like borophyll. If anyone gets that reference, you're my friend. Anyway, so we have these important players, and we're going to star these because to me, it's pretty important to understand. As we're talking about taking mitochondrial peptides, literally pushing these mitochondrial peptides, or rather pushing these mitochondria harder into overdrive, whether you are sick, dysfunctional, living in our society today, an athlete, it doesn't matter. You're going to need to keep these babies healthy. So that's where the glutathione supplementation, the superoxide dismutase, the chlorophyll, and we'll talk about that. So we have all these things going on. That's the rough structure, but we have a lot more channels and a lot more important things to talk about. So what we're going to do, and this is where we're going to start changing. I think I'll keep black out for now. We're going to do, can you see that on the camera? I don't think so. I'm colorblind though. And green does not show up to me, so I am not going to put that up there. I don't know what just happened there. It got mad at me. Just freaked out. Maybe because I use this. You guys know I'm keeping all of this in because why not? Should be live. Okay, so apparently the cell I was going to draw turned into a vortex. So we're going to draw right next to that. So we have this cell, okay? So in this cell, we have this DNA. That DNA spits out what? mRNA. That mRNA then spits out what? Ribosomes, right? So we have those ribosomes that will then go ahead and push over an actual unfolded protein. So that unfolded protein now has to get into the mitochondria to actually do something and really do anything important. So we have this whole cascade of, and we talked about this in the SLU video a little bit, about Tom and Tim. So the translocase of the outer and inner membranes and their chaperone. So we're going to draw them essentially two next to each other. So what we have is the translocase of the outer membrane, where we actually have this unfolded protein coming through, binding, passing through. We're adding an actual chaperone on there to get through to the next portion. So the same thing, binding, action coming through. That is that translocase of the inner membrane in there. Once it's in there, that's when it can actually go ahead and be acted upon by what? Proteases, right? These proteases will then positively fold all those proteins. So we're going to say it's going to fold, and then that's going to have an enzymatically active protein that can actually do work, right? So we had that cell, we had that action, we understand that those are certain different channels we're talking about here. Some other channels we're talking about, and I'll keep this one in red actually, we'll save blue for more important stuff. We'll save blue for the actual peptides, right? So, and there's actual channels everywhere. Okay, so there's just a lot going on here. But over here, we're gonna have 1, 2, 3, and we're just gonna say glucose, amino acids, and we're gonna do fatty acids, right? So fatty acids can enter the mitochondria and go through the process of what? Beta oxidation. Amino acids can then come into the mitochondria, and then we see the process of what? Part of that whole urea cycle. Glucose can come in and out, depending on what we're trying to do, and that'll have the process of what? Glycolysis. So structure, couple different portions there, couple different channels there. We have to now kind of go into the electron transport chain. Because to me, of everything else, this is probably one of the more important things. And we're going to get rid of this cristae so we have more room. Because now we're going to draw something a little bit more important. Where we're going to have, and actually I will, electron transport chain is going to be what we're drawing right here. So what we're going to have is our complexes, right? So in these complexes, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll draw bigger. So we have complex 1, complex 2, complex 3, complex 4, and then over here we have our actual ATP synthase. So this is part of the whole spin that I've talked about so much about mitochondrial peptides and mitochondria as a whole. So we have these. Why is this important? Though, let's backtrack. We're not going to break down all the processes, but if we actually summarize it, and I will use black for this one, very briefly, just going back to basic biochem, we are having our glucose to glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate to fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So glycolysis, right? We know that. All the way through glycolysis to give us a pyruvate. That pyruvate then goes over to an acetyl-CoA. And then here after the acetyl-CoA, This is where if you ever see in like any textbook, it always does this circular pattern. That circular pattern is the Krebs cycle, right? The Krebs cycle is yielding off FADH2s and NADHs. What these do, because it's super important to understand for what we're about to talk about, is these are actually carrying those electrons. So they're carrying these electrons. So the process of substrate utilization is throwing off these FADH2s, these NADHs, and giving us these electrons. It's important to understand because these electrons are then going to go through here, okay? So the electrons, and I will keep this in black, the electrons are going to go, and we're literally going to put an electron, 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 electron. What they're doing is they're skipping, right? They're skipping from complex to complex. What that does is creates that protonic gradient. And remember we talked over here about in the intermembrane space, it's high in proton ions. It's because of this skipping, it's actually then pushing those protons here, 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 and all that kind of fun stuff. So we now have this gradient shift to where we're having a high amount of proton ions as these electrons are skipping through the chain, right? What we're going to see that happen is go through, have this whole ATP synthase-based spin reaction, have a lot of spin-offs, but the main thing we're really looking at is that actual ADP and inorganic phosphate that's then going to essentially fuse, right? We're going to have that fission, and then we're going to have ultimately ATP production, right? So that is also known as oxidative phosphorylation. So if you ever see oxphos, that's what we're talking about, oxidative phosphorylation. Now, where and what happens if you're dysfunctional, if your mitochondria aren't working properly, or if you're trying to be too optimal and taking too many mitochondrial peptides? The spin. So what normally happens is if this process is thrown off because of one reason or another, again, could be sickness, could be chemically induced, could be so many different things, is you're actually going to get the leaking of protons and electrons out, right? So we're literally having what's called electron and proton leak and slip. And the reason why that's so bad is it's going to generate all these hydrogen peroxide ions in all these different reactive oxygen species. So it starts to literally generate reactive oxygen species. Now, in normal cell metabolism and normal mitochondrial metabolism, that's going to happen. To some degree, we're going to have spin-off of these reactive oxygen damaging species. That's just part of it. But is it enough to handle, or is it too much to overload and overwhelm our system? That's where it's tough. Because if we are taking something like a SLU-PP-332, because that's like the kind of biggest example, right? You can take too much and then you'll get tachycardic, you'll start getting more tired, you'll start actually getting sick, you'll have that reverse immune response, you might get psoriasis, you can have all these problems because we're spinning the mitochondria too hard, we're not able to handle those protons and electrons, which means we're not able to handle those subatomic particles, which then causes them to leak and slip, which then causes reactive oxygen species to occur. You'll know this is happening. I talk about the Walmart phenomenon all the time. Go to Walmart and people watch. You'll see people walk, you'll hear like moving at that pace. That's literally a sign of someone slipping protons and electrons. As nice as I could say, I don't mean it at all. That's a real world example of someone that can't handle their subatomic particles. So all of a sudden, if you're taking mitochondrial peptides and you feel like you're aerobically, anaerobically getting out of conditioned, you're breathing heavier and harder, it might not be because you're outputting more and you're not working harder. It could actually be because you're just slipping electrons and protons. So as a general rule of thumb, those are the kind of the main important things. There can also be these other portions we should actually talk about. So these BCL2s, and normally we have these cytochrome Cs, right? What can happen is if there is trauma or damage or the wrong environment for these mitochondria being overspun with mitochondrial peptides, we can see actually leaking out and coming out here. And what it starts to do is it'll actually interact with a couple different cascades. It'll have that whole upregulation of caspase. And what that's going to do is do what? Start driving up apoptosis. So it's something we want to be very cognizant of and something very aware of. Although mitochondria are massively beneficial, I mean, it's like everything else. In biology, things on the extremes are where you run into problems. So that's kind of everything I wanted to talk about with mitochondria in terms of the structure and how things work. And I wanted to leave this up here and now label essentially where these mitochondrial peptides are working at. And again, remember, when we're talking about mitochondrial peptides, take this all with a grain of salt because they're all technically working everywhere. They're biasing certain areas, but they're technically working everywhere. We're going to start off with the electron transport chain. We're going to start off with BAM-15. We're going to start off with SS-31 because to me, I think that's a very important part to understand because of how important the electron transport chain is, right? So we're looking at, how do I want to do this? I'll do SS-31 first, okay? So SS-31, in my paradigm, is really the mitochondrial period you want whenever you need the most amount of mitochondrial in organ-based healing. You don't just need organ-based healing, but if you're trying to heal your mitochondria, think about SS-31 as the healing agent. No matter what you do, if you're making mitochondria healthier and work better and function more properly, you're going to improve body composition, you're going to improve sleep, you're going to improve sirtuin cascades because SS-31 can actually do that with SIRT1. You can see so many positive effects actually happening off of that. But remember, we're trying to differentiate between what these actually do in application. So in application, SS-31 is more favored for the healing side of things. So if we're trying to look at overall healing, really, SS-31 is our biggest option because what it's doing is it's actually binding here. So it's actually coming in. So remember we talked about that electron, proton leak and slip with electrons. SS-31 is going to come into here and essentially, and this isn't exactly how it works. So it has that whole cardiolipin-based cascade. It's going to engulf and assist in the positive transportation of all these electrons so that this slip and leak does not happen. So right out of the gate, you see any kind of oxidative load and stressor coming from mitochondrial side of things can be fixed with SS-31. That's pretty freaking cool, right? So now in the same conversation, we are looking at our BAM-15. And this sort of things might get a little more complicated and complex, but we're going to talk about it. This is where if you look at those proton gradients, I don't have enough space here because I'll have to erase a couple of things, but as you're moving and skipping these electrons and then generating ATP, you can also, without skipping these electrons, actually just push those proton ions out. So what BAM-15 does is, and I'll do this, so BAM-15 is coming into here, and instead of these protons being pushed out because of the electrons, the protons are actually being just pushed out. So they're just being pushed out. And what does that generally cause a little bit of? Heat dissipation. So literally, as you're pushing these, that's why it's called a protonophore uncoupler, right? Words make sense, right? We have that as a protonophore uncoupler driving heat dissipation, but unlike something like a 2,4-dinitrophenol, which can cause excessive heat and temperature changes and cause a lot of problems long-term, BAM-15 is a lot safer option, and it works better at causing this whole process of pushing out those proton ions, works very good at keeping temperature levels low, and does not push it out so much to the extent to where you have that proton-electron leak and slip, unless if you take too much. Everything's dose dependent, but BAM-15 causes the wasting of ATP with a minimal amount of proton-electron leak and slip. Because in reality, any of these compounds up there can cause proton-electron leak and slip besides SS-31. SLU can cause it, Mots-C can cause it. If you actually take enough SS-31, you could probably cause it because at some point, how much of a chaperone is that going to happen with the electron transport chain on the electron side of things? And what's going on with those protons? So you could just have a proton leak and slip problem, not an electron leak and slip problem, if that makes sense. So in general, that's how BAM-15 is working from a positive aspect, right? From a fat loss aspect. So we're going to go, because with this, remember, we are not just increasing fat loss. If this mitochondria was in a tumor, okay, in tumors, there are obviously, they have their own mitochondria. And if you can then come in and make these mitochondria of tumors less efficient, because that's what this is doing, what's it going to do to those tumors? It's going to make them less efficient. They're going to change how they utilize substrate utilization. It's going to modify their glucose utilization and therefore slowly kill them off. So in the body composition world, BAM-15 is amazing to drive fat loss. Obviously, that's also going to drive up overall nutrient partitioning. Looks like a kid wrote it. But then in the tumor-based world, it's going to start to actually downregulate tumor, I'm just going to say tumor health. But in reality, it's making these tumors work less efficiently. Now, an even cooler step, generally when we're looking at heat dissipation changes to receptor architecture and morphology, we can see heat dissipation then changing the localized receptors in the area. So something like androgen receptors spontaneously uncouple at like 103 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that, which is cool. We're not getting that with something like this. You can get that from like a localized set of squats in the quads or, things like that, wherever there's a high amount of temperature change and hemodynamic flow. Hard to do with these compounds, but we can solve some stimulation. That some stimulation from a BAM-15 is not enough to spontaneously cause complete uncoupling, but can help. So then BAM-15 comes in to drive improved receptor uncoupling of an androgen receptor variety. What that means is if you're taking BAM-15, it's going to improve how your androgen receptors function and work, and therefore you're going to get more action of your endogenous or exogenously applied androgens, hormones, whatever you're doing. So right out of the gate, BAM-15 is working awesomely from that aspect. So we have that. Let's look at, let's go, where's mitochondrial DNA? It's mitochondrial DNA right there, right? Let's go ahead and let's look at those little suckers. If you zoomed into these mitochondrial DNA, so we have mitochondrial DNA, I'm running out of room. We're zooming into there, right? They have those short open reading frames. Those short open reading frames can then produce a couple different mitochondrial varieties, we'll say. One of them is going to be mitochondrial open reading frame of the 12th sRNA-C. That's telling you where it's acting, how it's acting, what it has the potential to do. Now, if we go back for a second, we say SS-31 is really our healing-based agent. Again, all these are going to have spillover, but SS-31 is kind of the overall healer. If you have organ-based trauma, that's what I'm going to. If I have CKDs, if I have cardiac failures, that's what I'm going to. It can also then repair mitochondria and correct some problems if you're overslipping too many problems during the weekdays. BAM-15 is the player. It's really the body composition player, more the athletic player. That's really the fat loss agent there. Can also have uses in terms of killing off tumor growth. So that's a cool one. Mots-C is the one where it's kind of in between. If you look at its intramitochondrial actions at the mitochondrial DNA level, we're seeing some changes with purine biosynthesis and some changes with actual folate metabolism. What it's doing, those changes, is it's actually going to drive up AMPK levels. Those AMPK levels are then going to they're going to drive more nutrient partitioning, they're going to drive more central beta oxidation, and they're going to put you in a very parasympathetic state. So as an overall rule of thumb, Mots-C can be used to drive up recovery, to drive up health, to drive up fat loss, and then we look at a couple other things it does. It does also, so SS-31 and Mots-C of all of them have the most amount of sirtuin, specifically one, sirtuin activation and potentiation. So that's why we see these as being more so like these healing-based agents and players, but Mots-C can do some other cool things too in terms of increasing glycolysis, increasing glycogen storage, a little bit of everything. So now we have this player in Mots-C. It's kind of being like the in-between SLU and the SS-31, meaning it's the player that can not only drive body composition changes and performance, but also drive a good amount of health. So Mots-C is kind of that in-between player. Now, Do I have enough room over here? I do. If we kind of look at driving the entire mitochondria from every single aspect, both directly and indirectly, non-genomically and genomically, that's where these estrogen-related orphan receptors, so SLU alpha, little beta, gamma as well. But this is where we're seeing SLU-PP-332 come in. This is, again, the player, and we've already done a whole seminar on this. We've talked about it so much, but I feel like we have to really hit it hard in this conversation as well. We are looking at this doing so many things as being the driver on parasympathetic beta oxidation. We could see it being a driver on anabolism, both directly and indirectly. We can see it actually driving up fiber type base transformation. We can see it actually improving and healing a lot of ocular issues, healing a lot of erectile tissue-based issues. We can see it acting as a phonotropic. We talked about that. We see plus, plus, plus with SLU. So overall, if we're just looking at these, right? SS-31, healing player, mainly. BAM-15, fat loss or tumor regressor player, mainly. Mots-C, a little bit of health, a little bit of body composition, a little bit of performance. And then SLU, mainly the body composition and performance player, but has spillover everywhere. The problem is, if you're trying to compare SS-31 to an SLU, the reason why SS-31 wins out on the healing aspect is because SLU does not help the actual positive protection of those electrons. It can spin that ATPase so hard that then you can throw off a lot of those electrons. So that's where, if we're trying to say, again, the healing between the two always goes to the SS-31. The body composition changes and the overall driver on performance, athleticism, and all that fun stuff, that really just, it has to go to SLU. And we see that so much in actual application. So if that's how everything's working on paper, now let's take a look at, I'll put them over here. So GW501516. This is another cool one. We've talked about it a lot. This has so much spillover into so many different worlds, from positively altering your HDL functionality. This was the one that was knocking statins off the market way back in the day, and then you know how that goes. But in the mitochondrial world, this is looking at making more. This is looking at driving more, excuse me, I don't know what that was, driving up more mitochondrial biogenesis. So increasing the number of these players. So GW501516 is really the mitochondrial multiplier. Is that how you spell multiplier? M-U-L-T-I-P-L-Y-E-R? I hope that's right, or I'll feel dumb. The mitochondrial multiplier, I didn't want to write out mitochondrial biogenesis. So GW is the one that will drive up more mitochondria. More mitochondria. There's also other players out there that can drive up mitochondrial biogenesis, like an injectable L-carnitine, right? So we're going to do, it does that extremely well. So no matter what you're doing with these other mitochondrial peptides, if you need to make more new mitochondria, then you would take something like a GW or something like an L-carnitine. The spillover to those as well, like L-carnitine, like we've talked about before, increasing VO2 max, increasing substrate utilization, actually being able to operate on the whole 2-fuel, 3-fuel theory, depending on what you want to look at it. GW being the player to drive up a lot of coendurance-based cascades, increasing VO2 max, improving our HDL functionality, improving that HDL number, and really doing a good job with cholesterol panels. Both of those are amazing mitochondrial multipliers or mitochondrial biogenic players. Now, Urolithin A is an awesome one. And I'm kind of putting these off to the side because they're not really directly acting here, even though technically they are. So Urolithin A. This has a good amount of research behind it. This is one of the, I think, one of the better longevity players out there. This is the one where we're looking at actually recycling damaged mitochondria. It does a lot of other things, but again, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary action. To me, we're taking Urolithin A specifically for that reason. So this is the one that's actually increasing the recycling of damaged mitochondria. So as you are multiplying mitochondria, as you are healing mitochondria, as you are pushing mitochondria harder and harder, things are going to get damaged. That's part of nature. That's part of biology. So to recycle and remove the dead, then create the new, what else do you need? That's pretty awesome, right? Now, even furthermore than this, we also then have to talk about these players down here. We talked about the glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and chlorophyll. But again, I think that these are so vastly misunderstood and misrepresented. When we look at these players, we see glutathione supplementation. If we're mainly looking at that injectable preparation, the liposomal forms, the traditional oral tablets, things like that, they're all beneficial. Traditional, whatever glutathione you buy at Walmart is going to work to, physiological action levels. So decent, nothing crazy. The liposomal gets you a little into that super physiological chemical action-based world. So awesome. So more chemical signaling over here than this with the liposomal. Then the injectable takes it to that next level. And that can allow you to get into the whole super physiological dosage ranges to where you can just take more and more and more based on how much you heal and how much healing you need. I mentioned whenever I had my flu protocol, I took grams of injectable glutathione. I had an IV set up with a couple cool players in there, and flu was gone in a day. So injectable glutathione is amazing. And I know I'm not sure why there's a back and forth controversy about glutathione not getting intracellularly. Look and just Google cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulators. Look at all of the families of glutathione transporters. There's so many transporters in our body, it would be impossible for glutathione to not get intracellularly. And we know that because everything in cells is based on that ratio of oxidized to reduced glutathione. So GSH versus GSSG. So glutathione has to come in here at some point to drive up the health of our mitochondrial matrix, but really the healing of the entire mitochondrial as a whole unit. Then we have superoxide dismutase and our chlorophyll. And that's where we're looking at a product called Energy Bits. So Energy Bits, amazing product. What it is it's spirulina and chlorella, but if you look at how a lot of these different algae processes are done and manufactured, the heating process kills off a lot of the enzymes involved in making these viable products. So when you're getting it, you're getting 10% of the action you could be getting. Energy Bits, the reason why I like it so much is because it's properly manufactured, and I'm sure there's a lot of other good ones out there. This is just the one I always latched onto. I love the research behind it. I love the people behind it. I don't know any of them personally, but I've seen enough interviews, this, that, and the other. But I absolutely love these products because we're getting our spirulina to drive up superoxide dismutase levels. We're taking that in the AM. Could be a little stimulatory. And then we're taking our chlorophyll, or chlorella, in the PM. That can drive some melatonin cascades, can keep you a little bit more regular, so we take it at night to kind of match those morning BMs and all that kind of fun stuff. But we're donating superoxide dismutase and chlorophyll to the body with Energy Bits. So if you are, and again, this is not all the time, nothing is all the time, but I'm assuming I'm out there working with someone. If I'm not working with you, if I'm working with you, there's a reason why we're not taking this, that, and the other. Because look on the board. You could take all these things at one time, run into problems, but they all sound awesome, right? So if you don't have a coach, or if I'm not working with you, or anything like that, take everything with a grain of salt, because we do not want to take everything at one time. That's when you run into problems, because you can't take SLU and all of these to drive the healing and then to drive the actual energetics, and take SS-31 to then manage the electrons, and then take GW to drive up more mitochondrial multiplication, because what ends up happening? The folding of these proteins, remember, these are folding hubs, starts to become dysregulated. We see it all the time. And people start to get less healthy, more sick, more dysfunctional. Performance goes down, autonomics go off, because they're taking every single thing under the sun. There's a time and a place in order to have all these in play, depending on how dysfunctional you are. There's a time and a place when you have one or two of these in play. So we're going to go through a little bit after this, but essentially I just want to make sure that that's understood, that although there's a lot of players up here and there could be a lot more, we have to be cautious with how many things we're adding in at one time. Especially in this mitochondrial world, because we can see how beneficial they are. Not just for longevity, but for performance, body composition. So to me, my paradigm, what I think would be the ideal scenario, would be someone is taking in some kind of mitochondrial peptide year round, but they're rotating it. So I think that pretty sure that this broke. Pretty sure I broke it earlier. Let's see. Oh no, it's working. There we go. So I'm going to erase some of that. And what we're going to be looking at now is overall dosages. We're looking at timing. We're looking at a couple different things. Now we're going to actually put together a scenario, so you guys have some real takeaways from this video, because the last thing I would ever want is to have a video with all of this education and zero application. None of this matters from an education aspect if you can't actually apply it. There's a time for things to be cool just for education's sake. There's also the majority of the time whenever you actually need to apply it. So let's go through this scenario. We're going to go through a couple different ways we could do this. And again, this is not standardized across the board, but we're just going to give you guys some thoughts, some ways to think and see through my lens how I program for myself, my clients, and things like that. We're going to say we have someone over here. We're going to say their goal is really longevity, right? Versus the athlete over here, okay? And we're going to say something like month 1, month 2, and then month 3, just to make it a little bit easier to follow along. So, in this longevity world, going back to what we talked about over here, what's something that both players could actually have in play? Honestly, both of them could handle some glutathione and some energy bits. To me, those are background players that could be in basically every protocol. So we have that, right? So both right here is going to be glutathione, and then we're going to have energy bits. So we have that. More than likely, so if you are extremely dysfunctional, you can be taking glutathione every single day, injectable glutathione every single day. And then as you kind of move through the spectrum of dysfunctionality and get more to healthy, then it goes to just rest days. So in this scenario, let's say that they're both relatively healthy. That person's just trying to drive more longevity. That person's just trying to drive more athleticism, more body composition changes. This could be a football player, a bodybuilder. We're not going to get specific for this video or the video will go too long. But glutathione is only coming on rest days, okay? We're going to be taking our taurine with our glutathione to break those sulfide bonds to give us more usable glutathione. Ranges, again, from males to females, we're generally looking at with the taurine addition, that tends to give a good amount, 50% plus efficacy depending on the individual. Something like 200 to 400 milligrams intramuscular 2 times a week, ideally. Let's say you have 2 rest days, so twice per week. Usually that's a good range to drive up overall recovery and maintenance of cells. So we have that. Energy bits, pretty simple. All males can be at 10. If you've never had them, they're these little pieces. That's the only thing I can't stand about these products. They're these little pieces, and they're annoying to try and count out. And sometimes I'll take 15 because I just don't want to put 5 back in the bag. They're annoying. I wish they'd make bigger pills. No one's going to chew on them because they taste terrible. That's the only downside about these products. But males will take 10 tablets of spirulina in the morning and chloral at night. Females tend to take about 5 spirulina in the morning, chloral at night. There's a time and a place to work up. There's a time and a place when females will take more than that. There's certain scenarios where even on like fasting days, because technically there are a lot of trace nutrients and amino acids and things like that, it's a low caloric count. I like bringing those in on fasting days as like a modified fast. But energy bits every single day, give it to your kids, give it to your mom, give it to your dogs if they'll eat them. Like literally, that should be in for everyone. So we have those players. Now let's look at, okay, what are we going to do on the longevity versus the athletic world? For the athlete, you know what? SLU is going to be the SLU-P. Now I'm talking like Jay. SLU-PP-332, not SLU-P. I like saying SLU. So the athlete is going to be doing SLU-PP-332, and they're going to be doing it Monday through Friday, because we're going to be starting off with 100 micrograms and slowly working that up and seeing week to week, an extra 100 micrograms, how they respond. At a certain point, when you take too much, spin will be off, or you'll get tachycardic or gynecomastia. You'll start to notice things are regressing. That means your dose is too high. Pull it back 100 micrograms. You found your dose, perfect. Keep it there. We're generally doing all these things in courses. So in here, we're going to make it simple and again, go 1, 2, 3 months. But in general, you could do it longer than that. You could literally do SLU through this entire time frame, cycle into something else, or keep it in the background the whole time, just have the weekends off. Tons of varieties and ways I've done this over the years. But let's say we have that. So if we're spinning our mitochondria so hard on the weekdays, on the weekends, maybe in this scenario, we spun them so hard, we're starting to get some signs and symptoms of proton electron leak and slip. Maybe during the weekdays, we are starting to be a little more belabored with our breathing. SS-31 then comes in on the weekends, right? So now we have SS-31, Saturday and Sunday. That's going to come in anywhere from about starting with 1 milligrams to maybe 5 milligrams intramuscular sub-Q, depending on your preferred route of administration. A lot of the administration with these, it's not so much time dependent. A lot of it is more so enzymatically dependent, so how you respond to them. You can never honestly argue against going against intramuscular, so you can honestly do it either way. But we're taking this SS-31 Saturday and Sunday, and we're going to potentiate it. Because this is healing from an electron standpoint, we're trying to literally turn these mitochondria on and get them functioning better. So this is where you would actually do this. You take your application of SS-31 and then go outside and get first light exposure, 5-10 minutes, something like that, or do red and near infrared light on the actual area you applied it. Technically could be global depending on where you want it to act, but a ton of things like that. And we didn't mention that, this whole mitochondrial biogenesis-based world, light therapy. Full spectrum light, going outside, getting that sun exposure, grounding the transference of electrons can help to improve your mitochondrial health. The sun exposure drives that mitochondrial biogenesis. It has that infrared change. BAM-15 can actually help to, because of the uncoupling we talked about before, can release more endogenous infrared light. So a lot of different things to talk about, but this video goes without saying, don't forget about the basics. Sun exposure, grounding, positive nutrition, good sleep, all of these matter way before any of this. So make sure that's done. I think we've done enough seminars now, though, to where people know that we should do that, but just to make sure. So we have that. So overspin, drive athleticism, drive all that fun stuff, and then correct the spin, correct any of the negatives from there, right? Now on the longevity side of things, again, could say we could do some of the SLU, but let's say this person wants a little bit of health and a little bit of body composition. What does that sound like? Mitochondrial open reading frame with the 12th S RNA-C, right? So we're going to bring in Mots-C, and we're bringing that in daily. This could be dosed as low as 200 micrograms daily, worked all the way upwards of a couple milligrams daily, depending on how you respond to it. While you are driving the mitochondria to do a little bit of everything, what's going to happen? Probably going to need some recycling. There's going to be some damage along the way. So maybe in this scenario, we're bringing back in our Urolithin A, right? And this, we're taking 500 milligrams, and we're doing daily, because we're potentiating that action over the long haul. There's a time and a place where you'd also use Urolithin A here instead of SS-31 or on top of SS-31. This is one basic template example, just so you guys can understand how you can mix, match, and play. So now we go into month 2. Let's say they do that for a month, they take their notes, because we're trying to do at the end of 3 months, we look back, we say, when do we respond the best? When do we look the best? When do we feel our best? That tells us a lot of everything. So we do that. We go through now in month 2, okay? So now the longevity individual goes, you know what? Okay, I want to push a little bit more of the body composition changes, but I still want to keep my health. In this world, we can tend to do something like a rotation of SS-31 rotated every other day with SLU-PP-332. And then we're keeping the Urolithin A in daily. Remember, half-lives, peak plasma concentrations only matter so much. It's kind of like talking about calories with food. They definitely matter, they're definitely real, but what matters more is the non-genomic and genomic changes, what's happening right now acutely with enzyme systems, ribosomes, stuff like that, and then what's happening long-term chronic with our genome. I think that's really important to highlight and understand, because you can rotate these things in every other day fashion with a tremendous amount of success. So in this scenario, that individual wanted to get a little bit more body composition, maybe a little more performance, but they still wanted to make sure that they're driving the health side of things, okay? They're keeping Urolithin A in every day, 500 milligrams, they're good to go. The athlete over here now, maybe the athlete drove SLU-PP-332 so hard. Maybe they pushed it way too hard, but they want to keep it in. So they'll pull the dose back a little bit. Let's say they overspun, they have more problems because athletes tend to have those problems, right? We're keeping the SLU in, but we're actually lowering the dose. We are going to go ahead and we are keeping this in Monday through Friday. Actually, in this scenario, because we lower the dose. Let's say this individual, because I don't want you to think that you can only take it on the weekdays. That's not how this works. Let's say we keep it in now daily. But now we realize, okay, we're pulling back. We need another driver on mitochondrial biogenesis. Now that we're allowing our body to recover from an electron and proton leak and slip standpoint, this is wherever maybe we need a little bit more extra pressure on that side of things. This is where a combination therapy of GW and carnitine would come into play. GW would come in to bridge the gap between the drop in performance that we have with the SLU. It would now drive up that VO2 max. It would drive up positive glycolytic fiber type transformation, because remember, we lowered SLU. And then carnitine would come in to drive up more VO2 max changes, more performance changes, more nutrient changes, more substrate utilization changes, more mitochondrial biogenesis, all that cool stuff. So they are then using that. But again, if we're doing this every single day now, we got to recycle some of the damage. We're starting to build up a lot new mitochondria, and we're still pushing them not as hard as before, but still fairly hard because we're athletes. Urolithin A would then come in daily. So now we would rotate our urolithin A in. Right? So, okay, cool. The longevity person, we go back to them. Let's say they get to month 3, and now they're going, hey, and we're going to do this in both scenarios, right? Now everyone wants to lose fat. So let's say for 8 weeks, let's say these people got healthier and looked a little bit better, and these athletes performed better, built more muscle, all that kind of fun stuff. But let's say that it's getting close to summertime and everyone wants to lean out. We pivot a little bit, right? So how do we implement in the longevity community BAM-15 to not have problems? First of all, keep the dosage low, right? That weeds out a lot of problems. What we would tend to do for both is if you're getting in this kind of, let's say this is a summer-based scenario, because summer's actually coming up. So this can be a good scenario for everyone. This is where we do a combination therapy of BAM and SLU, and then more than likely SS-31 and urolithin A. So bear with me, ready? So both of these people want a combination, right? Because we need the body composition changes. We need the body composition changes and the fat loss of a BAM-15. But if you are pushing that much proton uncoupling, then you're going to have to, again, if you push it too hard, you'll start to get more lethargic. Even if you push it lightly, it's still making mitochondria inefficient. And that's completely fine because, again, we want to make them inefficient to just bleed off ATP. But we need to bridge that gap and then potentiate that gap so we have more fat loss, more anabolism, and overall more protection of our actual cellular structures that are our mitochondria. So SLU and BAM-15 would come in a combination. I love the whole 2-to-1 ratio. Something like 100 micrograms of SLU to 50 milligrams of BAM-15. Start there, slowly work up from there, but we always start off low. And then in this scenario, we're going to go with the longevity individual. Let's say the longevity person is at low. Let's say 100 micrograms and 50 milligrams of BAM-15. So this is going to be the lower dose. This is going to be the higher dose. Over here, and by the way, this carries down throughout this entire process. Over here in the longevity community, now we're going to have to bring in SS-31 on the weekends. And that is now going to be higher dosed with urolithin A daily, lower dosed. So the SS-31 is going to clean up those electrons. The urolithin A is then going to go ahead. It's going to start to recycle the damaged mitochondria. You're going to get the best of both worlds. This SS-31 could be worked up fairly high. This could be, and again, this is where finances, SS-31 is tough because it all comes back to finances. It is a compound that can get very expensive, and you could dose it literally up. I've had people with CKD use it to 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams. It has a tremendous amount of efficacy, but it's costly when you're dosing it multiple vials. So in this scenario, let's say they did 10 milligrams daily for the entire 4 weeks because they had BAM in and they wanted to make sure they were really prioritizing health, and that was the main focus, but still lean up a little bit. Whereas now the athlete, this person is pushing SLU. They're pushing BAM. Let's say they're upwards of 200 plus milligrams of BAM-15 and upwards of 400 milligrams or micrograms of SLU. At that point, what are we going to need to do? Urolithin A would come in higher dosed on the weekends. So we would have urolithin A higher dosed on the weekends. If you would take your total milligram dosage range for the entire week, truncate that into 2 days, that's what we do. So if you're doing 500 milligrams every day, you just divide that by 2 and split it up. So if you're doing the Mitopure, you would literally do, what would that be? It's like, 3, 4, 5 caps, depending on if you're taking more, if you're taking less, but we're looking at just truncating that actual dosage. So we have that on the weekends. But let's say in this scenario, again, you only have 4 weeks till summertime. You want to look your best. You're willing to push things a little bit more. If you're cycling, then what could we also do? A microdose of carnitine on those days, on the weekends. So we would have actual carnitine at a low dose, weekends only. That's going to drive more substrate utilization, more fat loss, more mitochondrial biogenesis whenever you're recycling. So you're essentially pushing hard, recycling, then making new. And you're actually recycling and making new at the same time, which is pretty cool. Now, that is literally just a rough scenario. There are multiple reasons why you would take multiple compounds of these at one time. There's reasons why you would rotate them out. There's reasons why you'd keep in just this for multiple months. I like this scenario and set up so you can start thinking about how to program for yourself and for your client base. Overall, we can go on to a lot more mitochondrial peptides and other players out there. I like keeping it to these big ones, and I like making sure we have some application here. So that was the mitochondrial peptide seminar. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll probably make a second one because there's a lot more we didn't talk about. As always, check out thepepcoach.com. Thank you guys so much and have a fantastic day.